Flying Scotsman started life as just another of Sir Nigel Gresley's A1 class of locomotives, but it is now considered the most famous locomotive in the world. But how did it get there? Flying Scotsman was built in Doncaster, the first locomotive of a newly formed London and North Eastern Railway. It went into service on the 24th of February 1923 with number 1472. It was designed by Sir Nigel Gresley himself as part of the A1 class, the most powerful locomotive used by the LNER at that time. By 1924, when it was selected to appear at the British Empire exhibition in London, the loco had been renumbered 4472 and given the name Flying Scotsman, after the daily 10 a.m. London to Edinburgh rail service, which started in 1862. The British Empire exhibition made Flying Scotsman famous, and it went on to feature in many more publicity events for the LNER. In 1928, it was given a new type of tender with a corridor, which meant that a new crew could take over without stopping the train. This allowed it to haul the first ever non-stop London to Edinburgh service on the 1st of May that year, reducing the journey time to 8 hours. In 1934, Scotsman was clocked in at 100 miles per hour on a special test run. The test run proved to LNER's directors that steam power could provide high speeds. LNER passenger locomotives had always been painted apple green, but during the Second World War, Flying Scotsman was repainted in wartime black, in common with all railway stock. After the war, it became green again and was rebuilt as an A3 Pacific. In 1948, British Railways was formed and rail travel in Britain was nationalised. Scotsman, now numbered 60103, was painted blue for a time, then BR green. It remained this colour until 1963, when it was retired by British Rail, and by this time it had undergone several alterations to improve its performance. But it had been pulling trains for 40 years, and steam engines were becoming old-fashioned. In 1963, Alan Pegler bought Flying Scotsman. As part of the deal, Pegler negotiated a complete overhaul of the locomotive. It was converted back to single chimney condition and repainted in LNER livery. The tender was exchanged for a corridor type and an agreement made that enabled it to run on the main line. In May 1968, on the 40th anniversary of the first non-stop run, Flying Scotsman travelled non-stop from London King's Cross to Edinburgh. And in 1969, Flying Scotsman headed to the good old US of A on a tour intended to promote British exports. The tour broke even in its first year, but the second lost money. In a bid to balance the books, Pegler arranged for the train to travel to San Francisco. The trip worked well operationally, but was a financial disaster. Alan Pegler was forced into bankruptcy and Scotsman was stranded in the USA. However, in 1973, Flying Scotsman was brought back to the UK after William McAlpine heard about the situation in the USA. He promptly put together a rescue plan, paying off the creditors and buying the locomotive. McAlpine had the engine restored at Derby Works and kept it running for 23 years in his ownership, extensively overhauling it twice. He even took Flying Scotsman to Australia. Good day, mate. Making it the first steam locomotive to circumnavigate the globe on its voyage there and back. While in Australia in 1989, it also set a new record for the longest non-stop run by a steam locomotive of 422 miles. Following the successful tour of Australia, Flying Scotsman ran special trains around Britain, including regular runs over the famous Settle to Carlisle Railway and trips hauling the prestigious Orient Express Pullman train. The locomotive was repaired again in the early 1990s, at which time pop impresario Pete Waterman formed a short-lived partnership with Sir William to run the locomotive. In February 1996, businessman Tony Marchington bought Scotsman outright for $1.25 million. But in 2004, Flying Scotsman hit the headlines again with yet another crisis over its ownership. A campaign spearheaded by the National Railway Museum to save the locomotive for the nation amassed the support of thousands, confirming it as a national treasure. The appeal to keep the steam icon in Britain was supported by a £1.8 million grant from the National Heritage Memorial Fund and generosity of the public. Its restoration was also completed with the help of a Heritage Lottery Fund grant of £275,000. From 2006, Flying Scotsman underwent an extensive restoration in the workshop of Riley & Sons E Limited. In 2016, the painstaking £1.24 million project to bring the legend back to life, resplendent in BR green livery in its guise as 60103, was completed. As the restoration process came to an end, all eyes were once again trained on the world's most famous locomotive. The next chapter in the Flying Scotsman story was its triumphant return as a working museum exhibit, conquering yet another record as the oldest mainline working locomotive on Britain's tracks. Flying Scotsman was unveiled to an enormous crowd inside the National Railway Museum's Great Hall before the locomotive returned to the track. Undoubtedly one of the jewels in the crown of the National Railway Museum's world-class collection. It can now be experienced by a new generation of Scotsman fans and will captivate the public for generations to come. Thanks for watching, and if you'd like to see more, don't forget to subscribe. We'll see you next time.